My name is Sylvia Sterling, and for the longest time, the only thing I felt I had inherited from my grandfather was a name that felt too heavy to carry. When I was 34, my uncles, the men who had taken over his prestigious architecture firm, were about to hold a press conference that they thought would be the start of their glorious comeback. They had no idea it was actually going to be the public funeral for their careers and the christening of my own. They never imagined that the quiet, dutiful niece they dismissed as a charity worker was the one holding the shovel. Before I dive into exactly how my uncle's desperate attempt to save face became the single greatest moment of my life, I want to welcome everyone here. Let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. I always love to see how far these stories travel. And if you've ever been underestimated by the very people who should have been your biggest supporters, go ahead and hit that like button because I have a feeling you're going to understand this story on a spiritual level. Don't forget to subscribe to join our community of people who know that sometimes the best vindication isn't loud, it's just built to last. My grandfather, Arthur Sterling Sr., was a man who built things that mattered. He believed that architecture was a public service, a way to shape a city's soul. His firm, Sterling and Associates, was his life's work, and the Sterling Building, a glorious Art Deco masterpiece in the heart of downtown, was its cathedral. I spent my childhood in that building, breathing in the scent of old paper, drafting ink, and the faint, sweet smell of his pipe tobacco. He'd let me sit on a tall stool beside his massive oak drafting table, my small hands trying to mimic his elegant, confident lines on a piece of scrap vellum. He never talked down to me. When I was 10 and showed him a crayon drawing of a community garden with a greenhouse made of colorful glass bottles, he didn't pat me on the head and call it cute. He tacked it to the corkboard next to a blueprint for a skyscraper. "Look at that, Elias," he'd said to his partner, Elias Vance, a man with kind eyes and a laugh that rumbled like distant thunder. "Sylvia understands that a building's purpose is to serve the people inside it. It's not just about how tall it is, but how deeply it reaches." My uncles, Arthur Jr. and Richard, were already in the firm by then. They would watch these moments from the doorway of my grandfather's office, their smiles thin and tight. They saw my bond with him not as something to cherish, but as something to be managed, a potential threat to their own standing. They were their father's sons, but they had inherited his ambition without his soul. When my grandfather passed away, it felt like the foundation of my world had crumbled. I was in my final year of architecture school, and his loss was a profound, hollowing grief. At the reading of the will, the firm and the bulk of his estate went to his sons, as everyone expected. My inheritance was different. He left me a sealed letter and a private trust, managed by a bank and inaccessible to anyone but me, with a handwritten addendum, "For meaningful work, Sylvia, not for vanity." My uncles had smirked, assuming it was a pittance, a sentimental gesture. "Don't spend it all on birdhouses, St. Sylvia," Arthur had whispered as we left the lawyer's office, a cruel little joke that Richard dutifully chuckled at. The sealed letter was for me alone. Inside, he had written about his fears for the firm's future. "They see buildings as monuments to themselves," he wrote. "They have forgotten that we are in the business of building homes, communities, and futures. They will chase the sky, Sylvia, but you must always remember the ground. Your heart is in the right place. Don't ever let them convince you that compassion is a weakness in our field. It is the only true strength." I folded that letter and kept it with me always, a secret talisman against the years of dismissal that were to come. The first 5 years after my uncles took full control were a slow, painful slide into everything my grandfather had feared. The firm was rebranded from Sterling and Associates to the sleeker, more impersonal Sterling Global. They chased international clients, entering competitions for vanity projects in far-flung cities. Their designs were all flash and no substance. Jagged glass towers that ignored the local climate, sprawling concrete plazas that were hostile to human life, and corporate headquarters that looked like aggressive, alien spacecraft. They bled money on these proposals, flying first class around the world to pitch their soulless creations, only to lose out to firms with more practical or innovative ideas. The Sterling Building, once a humming hive of creativity, started to feel like a museum. The older draftsmen, my grandfather's loyal team, were phased out and replaced with young, slick designers who could create impressive-looking digital renderings but didn't know the first thing about structural integrity or civic responsibility. I was given a small, forgotten cubicle in a corner of the main floor, a token position to maintain the illusion of family continuity. They called my department community outreach, a polite euphemism for Sylvia's little hobbies. I pour myself into my work, using the resources of my grandfather's trust to fund small but impactful projects. I designed a sustainable, low-income housing development on a neglected brownfield site, incorporating solar panels, a community garden, and a daycare center. It won a regional urban planning award. When the local news ran a small piece on it, my uncles were furious. Not proud, but furious. They called me into my grandfather's old office, which they had redecorated in chrome and black leather, erasing any trace of his warmth. Arthur tossed the newspaper onto the polished black desk. It skidded to a stop in front of me. "What is this, Sylvia?" he demanded, his voice dangerously low. "It's the Elmwood Park project," I said, my own voice barely a whisper. "It's affordable housing for 70 families." Richard, leaning against the window with his arms crossed, let out a short, bitter laugh. "Affordable housing. For God's sake, Sylvia, our name is supposed to be on skyscrapers, not glorified tenements. You're diluting the brand." "Grandfather would have been proud," I said, the words feeling like ashes in my mouth. Arthur leaned forward, his eyes cold. "Grandfather is gone, and his sentimental nonsense went with him. We're trying to land the Al Thani Tower in Dubai, a project that would put this firm back on the map, and our name is in the paper next to the words low income. You are making us look like a charity. It's embarrassing." "It's what we're supposed to do," I pleaded. "It's about people." "No, Sylvia," Richard cut in, his voice laced with condescending pity. "It's about money. It's about prestige. It's about legacy. Things you wouldn't understand. Now knock it off with these side projects. You're an employee of Sterling Global, not the director of a soup kitchen. Act like it." The family dinners became exercises in humiliation. They were held at my Aunt Clara's house, a woman who measured love in portion sizes and preferred a fragile peace to any kind of confrontation. My uncles would hold court, boasting about their latest almost deal, the billionaire they'd just met, the competition they were a shoo-in for. They would inevitably turn the conversation to me. "And Sylvia," Arthur would say, a forkful of roast beef paused halfway to his mouth, "how many lives did you save this week? Did you build a shelter for stray cats out of reclaimed driftwood?" The table would fall into an uncomfortable silence, broken only by Richard's forced chuckle. I would stare at my plate, my face burning, feeling the sympathetic but useless glances from my cousins. I tried to defend myself at first, to explain the complexities of sustainable design, the social impact of my work. But they would just wave a dismissive hand. "Ideals are lovely, dear," Richard would say, "but they don't pay for the mortgage on a building like this." They saw my passion as a childish affectation, my focus on humanity as a character flaw. The more they failed with their grandiose schemes, the more vicious their mockery of my small successes became. My work was a mirror reflecting their own inadequacies, and they were desperate to shatter it. My only real sanctuary was my correspondence with Elias Vance. After he retired, he had moved to a small coastal town, but we stayed in close contact. I would send him my plans, my proposals, and my frustrations. He would send back pages of detailed notes, insightful critiques, and unwavering encouragement. "They are small men, Sylvia," he wrote in one letter. "They are terrified of their father's shadow, so they try to build things big enough to block it out. But a shadow is just an absence of light. You, my dear, are bringing the light. Don't you ever stop." He was the keeper of my grandfather's true legacy, and he kept that flame alive in me when my uncles were doing everything they could to extinguish it. The breaking point for the firm, the event that set the whole devastating Rube Goldberg machine in motion, was the waterfront revitalization project. It was the biggest municipal contract the city had offered in 50 years. It was a chance to transform a derelict industrial waterfront into a thriving public space, a project that was pure Sterling and Associates, the kind of thing my grandfather would have given his right arm for. My uncles saw it as their salvation. They became obsessed, convinced that winning it would erase all their recent failures and silence their creditors. They poured every last dime of the firm's dwindling resources into their proposal. I saw the plans by accident one evening, left unrolled on a drafting table.
It was horrifying.
A massive, brutalist concrete esplanade, a cluster of luxury condo towers shaped like jagged shards of glass, and a private marina. It was a gated community for the 1%, built on public land. It was arrogant, expensive, and completely deaf to the needs of the city. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that it would fail. I tried to warn them. I approached Arthur in his office, my heart pounding. "Uncle Arthur," I began, "I saw the waterfront proposal. I don't think—" He didn't even let me finish. "You don't think," he repeated, not looking up from his computer screen. "That's correct, Sylvia. You don't. Richard and I are the architects here. You are the hobbyist. Please go back to your corner and let the adults handle the multi-billion-dollar contracts." The dismissal was so total, so absolute, that I couldn't even form a response. I just turned and walked away. A month later, the city announced its decision. Sterling Global was not a finalist. The contract was awarded to a consortium of younger, more forward-thinking firms. The news hit the financial papers the next morning. The uncle's house of cards, built on debt and bravado, began to collapse. The creditors who had been patient for years began calling in their loans. The firm was hemorrhaging money, and they were out of options. The failure was so public, so humiliating, that it broke something in them. Their arrogance curdled into a bitter, paranoid rage. It wasn't their fault, they claimed. It was the city council, a bunch of corrupt, small-minded bureaucrats who couldn't recognize genius. They were victims, and they were about to make one last, desperate move that they believed would save them, but would instead deliver them directly into my hands. The meeting was called for a Monday morning. The remaining senior staff, a handful of nervous-looking people, gathered in the main conference room. The air was thick with a sense of dread. My uncles, Arthur and Richard, stood at the head of the table, attempting to project an aura of grim but resolute leadership. They looked exhausted, their expensive suits hanging on them like costumes. Arthur cleared his throat. "As you all know," he began, his voice strained, "the firm has been facing some headwinds. The current economic climate, coupled with a distinctly anti-business sentiment from our city's leadership, has forced us to make some difficult decisions." He paused for dramatic effect, looking around the table. "We have been a pillar of this city for over 60 years. But the city has turned its back on us. Therefore, to ensure the long-term viability of Sterling Global, to allow us to become nimbler and more adaptable, we have made the strategic decision to liquidate our largest, most illiquid asset." I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. I knew what was coming. Richard picked up the narrative. "We have received an extraordinary offer for the Sterling building from a premier international development corporation, Apex Global Properties. The sale will clear our debts and provide us with a substantial war chest to pursue new opportunities on a global scale." He was smiling, a ghastly, triumphant grin. He was acting as if this was a victory. They were selling my grandfather's cathedral. They were selling my home. I felt the blood drain from my face. My voice, when it finally came out, was a strangled whisper. "You're selling the building? To Apex? They're developers. They'll tear it down." Arthur sighed, a long, theatrical exhalation of weary patience.
"Sylvia, please."
"It's a building. A collection of brick and steel. Its value is in its square footage, not your childhood memories. Yes, they're going to demolish it. They're planning to build a magnificent 70-story luxury residential tower. It will be a new landmark for the city." "It's already a landmark," I cried, my voice cracking. "It's a historically significant building. Grandfather designed it to last for centuries. And it had a good run," Richard said, his tone glib. "But times change. We have to be forward-looking. This is a good thing, Sylvia. The deal closes in 90 days. It will save this firm. It will save all of our jobs. He looked around the room, as if expecting applause. No one moved. The silence was thick with the ghosts of my grandfather's dreams. I looked at their faces, smug, self-righteous, and utterly blind. They were not just selling a building. They were erasing a legacy. They were selling their father's soul to save their own skins. In that moment, the years of quiet hurt, of being dismissed and demeaned, coalesced into a single point of cold, hard clarity. My grandfather's letter, his words about meaningful work, echoed in my mind. Grief is a fuel, Elias had written. And in that moment, my grief was a raging inferno. I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. Every eye was on me. I didn't say a word. I just looked at my uncles, my expression unreadable. I turned and walked out of the room, out of the building, and into the cool morning air. I took out my phone and dialed a number I knew by heart. "Elias," I said when he answered. "It's Sylvia. It's time. They're selling the building." The plan we hatched over the next few days was audacious, borderline insane, and utterly terrifying. But for the first time in years, I felt a surge of purpose that had nothing to do with seeking approval and everything to do with seeking justice. The first step was the foundation. I met with the trust managers at the bank, the same kind-faced men who had overseen my grandfather's account for decades. I explained my vision, a nonprofit foundation dedicated to promoting sustainable and human-centric urban design. A foundation that would purchase and preserve the Sterling building, turning it into a living center for innovation, a place for lectures, workshops, and a free resource for city planners and students. They listened intently. When I finished, the senior manager, Mr. Henderson, leaned back in his chair. "Your grandfather always said you had his vision," he said softly. "The trust was established for exactly this kind of meaningful work. The funds are at your disposal, Miss Sterling." The sheer amount of money in the trust stunned me. It was far more than a pittance. It was a dragon's hoard, carefully invested and grown over decades, a secret weapon my grandfather had left behind. It was enough. The next step was anonymity. We couldn't let my uncles know who was behind the counteroffer. If they caught a whiff of my involvement, they would scuttle the deal out of pure spite. Elias, with his decades of contacts, found the perfect law firm, one specializing in discrete real estate transactions. They set up a shell corporation for us, a name so bland and corporate it was practically invisible, Viridia Development. Viridia would be the public face, the mysterious entity making the offer. They drafted an offer that was 5% higher than the one from Apex Global Properties, with one key condition, a faster, 30-day, all-cash closing. We knew my uncle's desperation. Their creditors were closing in. The promise of cash, fast, would be a siren song they couldn't resist. As the lawyers worked their magic, I focused on the second front of our attack. I learned through a contact at City Hall, a junior planner I'd worked with on a park project, that the winners of the waterfront contract were facing a funding shortfall. Their primary investor had pulled out. The city, embarrassed and under pressure, was quietly and unofficially reevaluating the finalist proposals and was even open to a new, compelling bid if one could be submitted before their next council meeting. It was a once-in-a-lifetime long shot. The next 3 weeks were a blur of sleepless nights and frantic work. Elias flew in and set up a command center in my small apartment. The place was covered in blueprints, financial projections, and legal documents. While the lawyers for Viridia Development engaged in slow, careful negotiations with my uncle's lawyers, I threw every ounce of my being into crafting a new proposal for the waterfront. This wasn't a project for Sterling Global. This was mine. It was a manifestation of everything I believed in, everything my grandfather had taught me. I redesigned the entire space. The cold concrete esplanade became a series of terraced green spaces, using native plants to create natural flood barriers. The luxury towers were replaced with mixed-use buildings featuring affordable housing units alongside market-rate apartments, with retail on the ground floor for local businesses. The private marina became a public kayaking and paddleboarding dock, a ferry terminal, and an environmental education center. It was cheaper, more sustainable, more beautiful, and it gave the waterfront back to the people of the city. I poured my soul onto those pages, every line a rebuke to my uncle's greed, every tree I drew a testament to my grandfather's ideals. The day I submitted the proposal to the city planning department felt monumental. I walked out of City Hall into the bright afternoon sun, feeling a mixture of terror and exhilaration. That very evening, I got a call from our lawyer. "They took the bait," he said, his voice calm and professional. "Sterling Global has accepted Viridia Development's offer. They're rushing the paperwork. They want the money yesterday." I hung up the phone, my hand trembling. We had the building. Phase 1 was complete. The irony was so thick I could taste it. My uncles were so eager to get their hands on the money from the sale that they didn't do the slightest bit of due diligence on the buyer. Their arrogance was, as it had always been, their greatest vulnerability. The near miss happened a week before the closing. I was leaving a follow-up meeting with Councilwoman Eva Rostova, a sharp, no-nonsense woman who was the head of the planning committee. She had been intrigued by my unsolicited proposal, and the meeting had gone better than I could have ever hoped. As I stepped out of her office into the marble hallway of City Hall, I almost collided with my Uncle Richard. My blood ran cold. He was there to lobby someone, probably to complain about how unfairly the city had treated him. He saw me, and a look of amused contempt spread across his face. He was holding a large roll of blueprints, the official submission for the waterfront project. Well, look what we have here," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "St. Sylvia, networking for your little charity projects." My heart was hammering against my ribs. "Something like that," I managed to say, clutching the folder containing my own proposal to my chest, trying to shield it from his view. He didn't even notice it. His gaze was fixed on my face, full of a dismissive pity that was somehow more infuriating than outright anger. He reached out and patted me on the head, a gesture he hadn't used since I was a child. "That's nice, dear. Keep yourself busy with the little people. The real world is a tough place." He then turned and sauntered down the hall, a man so convinced of his own importance that he couldn't see the architect of his demise standing right in front of him. I leaned against the cool marble wall, taking a deep breath to steady my nerves. His dismissal, so casual and so complete, was the final insult. He didn't see me. He had never seen me. And that was why he was going to lose everything. The trap was set. All that was left was for them to walk into it. The day of the press conference was gray and overcast, the sky the color of dirty dishwater. My uncles had booked a conference room at a soulless airport hotel, a place of transient anonymity that spoke volumes about their current status. The room was beige, the carpet was stained, and the air smelled of stale coffee and desperation. I arrived early and took a seat in the very back row, wearing a simple gray dress, my hands folded calmly in my lap. I was invisible, just another face in the small crowd of local journalists and industry bloggers who had shown up, most of them looking like they were expecting to cover a car crash. Elias sat beside me, his presence a solid, reassuring anchor. He gave my hand a quick squeeze. "Deep breaths," he whispered. "The third act is about to begin." My uncles entered the room with a practiced swagger, forcing smiles for the cameras. They wore their best suits, but the tailoring couldn't hide the tension in their shoulders or the dark circles under their eyes. They looked like men playing a role, actors who had long forgotten their lines. Arthur stepped up to the podium first. A large screen behind him displayed the Sterling Global logo. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice resonating with a false sincerity. "We are here today to announce a bold new direction for Sterling Global. For over 60 years, this firm has been a leader in architecture, a pillar of this community. But communities change. And sadly, the leadership of our great city has fostered an anti-business climate that makes it impossible for visionaries to thrive." He painted a picture of themselves as victims, brave innovators crushed by the gears of a petty bureaucracy. He spoke of their vision for the waterfront, lamenting that it was too bold, too forward-thinking for the small minds on the city council. It was a masterclass in self-pity and blame-shifting. I watched the reporters, their expressions ranging from bored to skeptical. They weren't buying it. Richard then took over, his tone even more aggrieved. The loss of the waterfront contract, while disappointing, was a symptom of a larger problem, he declared. A problem of a city that has forgotten how to dream big. It is because of this climate, this stagnation, that we have been forced to make a painful but necessary strategic pivot. He gestured grandly. We have sold our ancestral home, the Sterling Building. It was a heartbreaking decision, but it was a move we had to make to free ourselves from the constraints of this city's limited worldview. The capital from this sale will fuel our new global focus, allowing us to take the Sterling name to places where innovation is rewarded, not punished. He was practically preening, spinning their humiliating defeat into a tale of strategic genius. They were abandoning the city that had nurtured them, and they were framing it as the city's fault. They were about to open the floor to questions, a smug look of finality on their faces. And so, Arthur concluded, stepping back up, while we say a sad farewell to our past, we look forward to a brighter, more profitable future. He never got to finish the sentence. A side door to the conference room opened quietly, and Councilwoman Eva Rostova walked in. She was not a large woman, but she had a presence that immediately commanded the room's attention. She was flanked by a single aide, and she walked with a calm, deliberate purpose directly towards the podium. The reporters stirred, sensing a sudden shift in the narrative. My uncles stared, their mouths slightly agape, completely blindsided. Gentlemen, she said, her voice clear and carrying easily through the silent room. I hope you don't mind. I was watching the live stream from my office, and I feel there are a few significant inaccuracies in your statement that require immediate clarification for the public record. Arthur stammered, Councilwoman, this is a private press conference. It ceased to be private the moment you started publicly maligning the city I represent, she countered, her gaze as sharp as a scalpel. She didn't wait for an invitation. She walked right up to the podium, and Richard, after a moment of stunned hesitation, stepped aside. She adjusted the microphone. First, she began, addressing the reporters, let me correct the most grievous misstatement. The city of Sterling is absolutely thrilled to announce that the historic Sterling Building, a jewel of our architectural heritage, will not be demolished. A wave of murmurs rippled through the room. I saw Arthur and Richard exchange a confused, panicked glance. Their whole narrative was already unraveling. Its new owner, she continued, her voice steady and strong, has a deep respect for the building's history and its founder's vision. That new owner is not a foreign developer. It is a new, locally based nonprofit organization called the Sterling Legacy Foundation. The color was visibly draining from my uncles' faces. They looked at each other, their expressions a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. Foundation? What foundation? The Sterling Legacy Foundation's mission, Rostova went on, her eyes scanning the crowd, is to restore the building to its former glory and transform it into a world-class center for urban planning and architectural innovation. A place of learning and collaboration, open to all. She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. Then she smiled a small, knowing smile. It seems only fitting that the founder and executive director of this new foundation is someone who truly understands Arthur Sterling Sr.'s ethos of building for people, not for profit. Someone he personally mentored. His granddaughter, Sylvia Sterling. Every head in the room, every camera lens, swiveled in unison to the back row, where I was sitting. The sudden flood of attention was like a physical force, but I met their gazes without flinching. I looked past them, directly at my uncles. Their faces were masks of pure, unadulterated shock. Their jaws were literally hanging open. Arthur's face was ashen, Richard's a blotchy red. They looked like they had been struck by lightning. But the councilwoman wasn't finished. She had saved the best for last. And on a related note, she said, her voice ringing with satisfaction, I am personally thrilled to announce that after an exhaustive review of several outstanding new proposals for the waterfront revitalization project, the City Council has voted unanimously this morning to award the contract. Not to a global conglomerate, but to the organization that presented the most innovative, sustainable, and community-focused vision for our city's future. She looked directly at me, a brilliant, triumphant smile spreading across her face. "Congratulations, Ms. Sterling. The waterfront is yours." The room erupted into a cacophony of shouting questions and flashing cameras. It was a storm, and my uncles were standing in the very center of it, utterly destroyed. The aftermath was chaos. The reporters, smelling a much better story than the one they had come for, swarmed past my uncles as if they were pieces of furniture, their microphones and cameras all pointed at me. Elias stood up and acted as a gentle but firm bodyguard, clearing a path for me toward the exit. Before we could leave, my uncles, their faces contorted with a grotesque mix of rage and disbelief, managed to push their way through the throng. "Sylvia," Arthur hissed, grabbing my arm. His grip was surprisingly strong. "What is this? What have you done?" His eyes were wild. "This is a family firm. You can't just steal it." Richard was right behind him, his voice a desperate, wheezing plea. "Our niece. Our brilliant niece. We knew you had it in you, Sylvia. We always knew." This is a victory for the whole family, for Sterling Global. The whiplash was breathtaking. One moment, I was St. Sylvia the charity worker. The next, I was their brilliant niece. The attempt to co-opt my victory was so pathetic, so transparent, it didn't even make me angry. It just made me sad. I looked down at Arthur's hand on my arm, and then back up at his face. My voice was quiet, but it cut through the noise around us. "Let go of my arm, Uncle." He was so surprised by my tone that he actually did. "This has nothing to do with you," I said, my gaze moving from his face to Richard's.
This isn't for you.
"It's not for the family. This is for Grandfather. This is for the work." I turned my back on them without another word and walked away, Elias at my side. I could feel their eyes on my back, but I didn't look back. I left them standing there in the wreckage of their own making, two irrelevant ghosts at a feast they hadn't been invited to. That evening, the city was quiet. The rain had washed the streets clean, and the air was cool and fresh. Elias and I stood on the sidewalk across from the Sterling building. It was dark, a silent monument waiting for its resurrection. I held up the new key, the metal cool against my palm. "Ready?" Elias asked, his voice soft. I nodded, unable to speak. We crossed the street, and I slid the key into the massive brass lock. The tumblers clicked with a satisfyingly solid sound, a sound of finality and beginning. The heavy oak door swung inward with a low groan, opening into the cavernous darkness of the main hall. The air inside was still and cool, thick with the scent I remembered so well. Old paper, wood, stone, and history. Moonlight streamed through the towering arched windows at the far end of the hall, illuminating millions of dust motes dancing in the silent air. They looked like a galaxy of tiny stars. In the center of the hall, draped in a white cloth, was my grandfather's drafting table. I walked towards it, my footsteps echoing in the vast space. I pulled back the cloth. The oak surface was smooth and cool beneath my fingertips. I could still see the faint nicks and grooves where his tools had slipped, the dark ring where his coffee cup had always sat. It was all still here. I leaned against the table, the enormity of it all washing over me. The years of being invisible, of being mocked and underestimated. It hadn't been a curse. It had been a shield. Their condescension had been my cover. Their inability to see me for who I was had been my greatest advantage. They were so busy looking up at the sky, trying to build monuments to their own egos, that they never thought to look at the ground beneath their feet. They never thought to look at me. The year that followed was the most challenging and rewarding of my life. The Sterling building, under the careful guidance of a team of historical restoration experts, came back to life. The grime was cleaned from its stone facade, the brass was polished to a brilliant shine, and the interior was retrofitted with state-of-the-art technology while preserving every bit of its historic character. We renamed it the Sterling Center for Urban Innovation, and it quickly became the hub my grandfather had always dreamed it could be. The Great Hall, once silent, now echoed with the lively chatter of students, the impassioned arguments of architects, and the thoughtful lectures of visiting city planners. Young, brilliant minds filled the studios, their ideas for a better world filling the corkboards where my crayon drawing had once hung. The waterfront project broke ground in the spring. It was a model of community-integrated design. The parklands became a beloved city gathering spot. The affordable housing units filled up with families, and the small, locally owned shops along the promenade thrived. It was architecture as a service, not as a monument. It was my grandfather's philosophy made real. My uncles, predictably, tried to fight back. They filed a frivolous lawsuit claiming I had used proprietary, family intellectual property, which I assumed was a euphemism for my last name. The judge dismissed the case in less than an hour, practically laughing them out of the courtroom. Their nimble global firm never materialized. The last I heard, Sterling Global consisted of the two of them in a small, windowless office in a strip mall, subsisting on minor renovation projects. Their fall from grace was as quiet as it was complete. They sent a Christmas card that year. Inside was a long, rambling letter full of self-serving apologies and vague allusions to how they had always pushed me to be my best. It was a final, desperate attempt to rewrite history. I read it once, then put a check for a generous amount in an envelope, made out a donation to the city's largest homeless shelter in their names, and mailed it to them. I never replied to the card. There was nothing left to say. Some relationships aren't meant to be mended. They are meant to be outgrown. Setting boundaries wasn't an act of cruelty. It was the final, necessary piece of construction in my own life. Looking back, I understand something profound about legacy. It's not a thing you inherit like a piece of furniture or a stock portfolio. It's a responsibility. It's a seed that's planted, and you have to choose to water it, to nurture it, to help it grow into something that provides shade for others. My uncle's thought legacy was a name carved on a cornerstone. My grandfather taught me it was the lives you improve, the communities you build, the future you help to shape. They underestimated me because they measured worth in square feet and dollar signs. They never understood that true strength is quiet, that true vision is focused on the human scale. Their mockery was the forge that hardened my resolve. Their dismissal was the cloak of invisibility that allowed me to work. They thought they were burying me, but they didn't realize they were planting a seed. Thank you for joining me and for listening to my story today. It's a reminder that your value is inherent. It isn't granted to you by anyone else, especially not by those who refuse to see it. Have you ever had a moment where being underestimated turned into your greatest strength? I would be honored if you'd share your story in the comments below. Your experiences matter, and they can inspire so many others. If this story resonated with you, please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories about finding your power. I wish all of you the strength to build the life you deserve, brick by brick.